Coming together to explore ideas, challenge perspectives, and engage in meaningful discussions today. We have the privilege of diving into Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a book that has profoundly shaped our understanding of human decision-making, biases, and the way we think. Whether you are encountering it for the first time, for me it's the first time, or revisiting its insights, I'm certain it will spark fascinating conversations. Guiding us through this journey is our distinguished guest speaker, our old friend, Mr. Derek Armstrong. As an executive leader in finance, data, and performance management, Derek brings a wealth of experience in applying analytical thinking and strategic decision-making, making him the perfect guide for today's discussion. We are honored to have him here to share his expertise and lead us in exploring the book's key themes. So let's get comfortable and open our minds and get ready for a thoughtful, provoking discussion. Let's give a warm welcome to Derek Armstrong.
All right, thank you. If you can't hear me clearly in the back, just let me know. I'm just struggling with the end of a sore throat, so I will project as much as I can. I'm really glad to be here again. I was here last February talking about poor Charlie's Almanac. Charlie Munger having passed away just around that time. It was a very relevant book. You'll see a lot of linkages today to this book too, in terms of thinking fast and slow. A lot of the stuff that Charlie Munger talked about and put into practice in his financial investing strategy and just general approach to the world was documented and researched by Daniel Kahneman, but well after the fact. So, thanks for inviting me today. Special thanks, of course, to Michelle Hsu for suggesting this book, and Tony for being our MC today. I previously read this book about 10 years ago, shortly after it came out. It was tough. I actually didn't make it through the entire book at that time, so I probably read about 2/3 of it. So this was a great chance to come back and revisit some of those ideas, and then to see the last third of the book, which was quite a capstone for the thinking that went on. So behavioral psychology and economics, they were really popular in government circles at that time. You might remember that in 2015, we had a new liberal government come in. They came out with something called deliverology, and this had at its basis also ideas around nudging people, just doing small things to get the population to make choices a certain way, not terrible choices, not trying to mind control or anything like that, but to encourage them to make choices that were beneficial for the overall kind of society. This was something that was in practice in England and other countries at the time too. So a lot of that thinking was based on the ideas that came out of thinking fast and slow. So you may have also read similar books. There were some by an author named Dan Ariely. I think Irrational Rationality or Rational Irrationality, I always get them backwards, was another one that was popular at the time and also made popular through like TEDx videos. So it was quite the thing 10 years ago. So in some ways we're a little bit behind the times by looking at it now, but it's also had a chance to mature and for the ideas to enter into general society. So it's very timely. Like I said, it's an excellent continuation of the work or the book we discussed last year for Charlie's Almanac. He also talked about how good decisions are made. He talked about behavioral psychology and the strategies that we can apply to combat our own psychological biases. So to me, that sounds like a pretty useful thing. So while I studied economics and finance, I actually started in psychology and international relations. So this does get back to something that was quite near and dear to me at the beginning of my academic career. My professional experience has also covered different fields, including government financial management, defense policy, provincial relations, all sorts of fun stuff like that, as well as senior management, so dealing with large teams of people and the kind of thinking and psychology that goes into that. So today, we're going to discuss the main findings of Thinking Fast and Slow, but I'm not going to be comprehensive about it. We would need quite a few more sessions to be able to do that, and I would also have to design a bunch more experiments. So once this is all over today, once we're finished with this overview, we'll also spend some time looking at the discussion questions that I shared in WeChat. If you haven't seen those, then feel free to sneak a glance while I'm talking. But similar to last year, you can kind of pick your own question that you would like to chat about. And we'll have little groups. You can talk with each other about kind of what struck you as the most important coming out of this book. And then after that, I'll bring together some of the data, which I'm going to talk to you about in a moment, and put up some numbers on the screen. So with any time remaining after that, be happy to have a questions and answers session. So you can pose whatever question you want. I may or may not have a good answer for it, but I'll try to at least reflect on how this book would relate to what you're interested in, and we can see from there. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that you are all sitting in a spot that has two pieces of paper, one little one and one big one. If you don't, find a spot that is empty that has a piece of paper. Okay? Now just look at the little one. Okay? Okay. So take a moment, look at the little piece of paper. Don't share. Don't share between you. Don't share. This is for you. It's private. Okay? Information privacy.
I just have a small one.
You don't have a small one?
Yeah,
Did somebody steal it?
Yes.
Okay, well, tell you what, I know which one you should have, so I'm going to give you one. Now, don't shoot the messenger. Okay. Now, if you want, in the meantime, you can all look at the other piece of paper, but don't, if you have one that's standing up, don't flip it over yet. I don't want you to look at the bottom yet, okay? So, this is the messy part. This is getting used to entering the data, but essentially what I'm going to try to do here is just get you to mark on a scale of 1 to 5 how you're feeling. You've just read this little note. You've come to this session, and on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel? And write that in the little box on your bigger piece of paper. Okay, and I'm counting on you, because if I don't have enough numbers written in that moment 1 box to represent your mood or your feeling about how things are going right now, then I won't be able to put pretty lines that make sense and have the whole conversation all come together. Yes?
I have a question for why it's moment 1 to 4. So
Well, we're going to do 4 different things.
So
We're going to have 4 awesome moments in this.
So right now is moment 1.
Moment 1, yeah. Okay, good question. Okay, so I'm just going to give a pause, and when you're done, just shoot a hand up or give me a hard stare or something like that. Okay. And I'm counting on everyone to do this too. If I get a blank paper back, I'll come find you. Okay. Has anybody not had a chance to write their moment 1 number yet? Yeah. Don't share your papers though. It's important.
She missed the instructions.
Okay.
She missed the instruction.
Oh, you need the instruction?
No, she's fine.
Okay, you're good.
You just answer the question. Well, where's your answer?
Okay, you don't need to worry about the instructions on it right now. You'll all have different types of the big sheet, okay? So don't compare. Okay, great. I'm going to assume we can move on now, because otherwise we'll be here for a while. So,
Right now it's a month.
okay. Now we've got this set up here. Okay, we're going to talk about experience first. So, all right, experience. Sorry, I'm just figuring out the clicker. What is experience? The book talks about it quite broadly. So when you think of what you experience from day to day, you think of your work, your personal, your life, everything that's going on. Every day is a stream of moments that we experience, infinite experience, waking, working, playing, fighting, loving, traveling, building, and sharing. Yet we're not overwhelmed by this. And we're not necessarily exhausted by it all. Some days. Rather, we engage in a series of judgments that regulates how much attention we devote to any given thing that we're experiencing. It's about efficiency. It's not about accuracy in terms of our judgment. We pay attention to the unusual, not the mundane. We don't focus on our time commuting to work or putting on our socks. Can anyone tell me, like in detail, the moment you put on your socks this morning? No, it's already gone. Your brain is not, that's not important for survival. However, we do pay attention to bad or good news. For example, a violent attack in our neighborhood, or a lucky colleague, say, who won a lottery. We might pay attention also to new situations, the first days in a job, for example, or a new home where you're getting used to you're building that daily routine, but it's not routine yet. Negotiating a big purchase like a car or a house or a company, or going to court to resolve a dispute. These are things that don't happen every day for us, so we pay a lot more attention to them. Now, our success in dealing with new situations or positioning ourselves in relation to good or bad news tends to be pretty bad. Like, we're not good at it. We have the idea that we're good at it, but in reality, we don't have a lot of practice with these new situations. So we use shortcuts. We answer familiar questions that aren't really always relevant to the situation. We find something that seems to be informative, it feels intuitively right, but it might not actually be leading us down the right path. We rush to logical conclusions without considering sometimes even easily available information. So how many of you, just by a quick show of hands, have made a decision, had it turn out not quite what you expected, and then thought, man, I should have just Googled that. But we didn't even take that moment, that 10 seconds, 20 seconds, just to type in a Google, okay, how did other people approach this? I know I've been guilty of that many times. And our brain is wired this way to facilitate survival in the evolutionary sense. Quicker reactions help avoid predators, or they lead to success in hunting. That's just the way our brain evolved. So in a modern age where success is much more abstract, there are shortcomings to this kind of shortcut taking. So let's have some fun with this. Okay, so what do you think about this? There was a poem. Now this is really tiny, so I'll read it out. Sorry, I should have made it bigger font. But in the book, there was not a poem, but a logical kind of chain. It said, all roses are flowers. Some flowers fade quickly. Therefore, some roses fade quickly. Now, throw your hands up if you agree with that. Okay, we got one brave soul. Anybody else agree with that kind of flow? So, all roses are flowers. Some flowers fade quickly. Therefore, some roses fade quickly. Right. I'm going to give you another example that will make it more obvious. All maple trees are plants with green leaves. Some plants with green leaves grow in the ocean. Therefore, some maple trees grow in the ocean.
No.
No. So that's obvious, right? But sometimes simple information that we're looking at our brains aren't wired to separate out the logical elements of statements, and instead they rush to a conclusion because it feels like it makes sense and it feels logical to follow that progression. And we've all been guilty of it, and we've all been manipulated by that through media or even as we go through a learning process. So you'll know that in this case, and in the book they talked about it, flowers that fade quickly are a certain set, but roses might not be in that set of flowers that fade quickly. So the logical link between the first two statements doesn't necessarily give you this last one here. And that's why an example that's a little more ridiculous is able to make that clear. So that's the danger of shortcuts. That's the danger of kind of our evolutionary thinking and how it presents pitfalls for us in a modern, more abstract world. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so let's move on to learning. So Kahneman and Amos Tversky, his longtime kind of research partner, investigated how people view themselves in the world. And they did this fairly exhaustively. They found that people considered themselves better at most things than the average person. Like, I'm a better driver than most people, or I'm a better investor than most people. And if you've ever had that thought cross your mind, you're not alone. In fact, most people will have that thought about something that they do compared to other people in the world. But by averages, that's impossible. There will be people who are below average, there will be people who are above average. But for most people to be accurate in thinking that they're above average in a bunch of things is not likely. So, better drivers, better investors, better cooks. I'm not a better cook, just to be clear. How can that be? We also find it difficult to consider new, better ways of doing things. Kahneman described in this book his methods for evaluating prospective army officers for the Israeli military. And so he and his colleagues, they devised ways, very complicated kind of evaluation techniques to look at the people who wanted to become military officers and try to predict their success. And so after careful evaluation, the team's selection methods turned out to be no better than random guesses. And they were quite clear in demonstrating that their methods didn't actually give them any new information about people. So surely they took that knowledge and created a new way to assess applicants. Well, no, they didn't. They went back to the old ways. They continued on with the process that they had in place. So they applied these old methods and efforts, and this was a team of psychologists who knew that they needed to approach this rationally, yet they struggled to use their new knowledge to revise how they were doing things, which seems bizarre, because they knew that there might be benefits or that they could do it with less effort, but they didn't change. So that's why I say, oops, I'm going to move on to the slide because it's much more interesting. We learn, yet we don't apply what we learn. We consider ourselves special, or that we're better than others, and that when there are better ways to act, we say great, but then we use what's familiar. And in fact, the framing effects that fall under kind of how we look at things and how we learn about things can be very useful for learning, but only if we apply them in a certain way. So if we look at framing effects that would, and a framing effect is where you kind of establish an expectation about a situation. You communicate that in advance. You kind of say, hey, we kind of think that something is going to be this way. And if it doesn't turn out to be that way, well, that's okay. Like we can accept that. It's the last part of that that is the framing effect. Framing the idea that errors are okay is actually what underpins the scientific method. You set a hypothesis, an idea about how the world works. And in the scientific community, the scientific method, it's common and familiar that sometimes you're wrong. So your hypothesis is completely wrong, and you stumble on something about how the world works that is instead much more interesting and much more exciting. So that's an area where framing effects can actually really aid learning as long as they're applied in a particular way. But otherwise, Kahneman kind of gives a whole pile of examples, which I can't go through because I don't remember all of them. But in the book, he talks about a number of different aspects of framing, how powerful framing is, how framing can actually get you to ignore certain types of evidence or to focus on certain types of evidence to the exclusion of other relevant information. So framing effects are a very powerful tool in how we learn and consume information and integrate it into how we operate in the world. So I'm just going to have a look here. So I'm going to see now just how you're feeling. So we're going to go back to our papers here. And I think it's a great moment for you to just, in moment 2, write down your mood score on one scale of 1 to 5. Remember, 5 is positive, 1 is negative, or 1 is not positive. 3 is in the middle. All right?
Feeling about.
How are you feeling right now? General feeling. Okay.
Moment 2, right?
Moment 2.
Yeah.
Moment 2.
Is about the sitting comfortable or about the whole worldview after listening to
You can pick. You can pick. Yeah. Sum up your life at this moment in one number.
It just feels less comfortable. Before that.
And remember, don't take numbers from your friends.
Oh, you're not supposed to.
They could be feeling different. Okay. All right, so it looks like most of you have already done that. So I'd like to move on to memory. We are what we remember, but not what we experience. So we've just talked about experience and experiencing things and how we kind of get tricked into different things, but we don't remember all that. So, before we get going on memory, I know you just had a number that you filled out. What I'd like you to do, though, is get your little piece of paper that tells you what kind of seat you're sitting in. And if you are sitting in a lucky seat, I want you to give your tag to somebody who is sitting in a regular seat. Yeah, I mean the little piece of paper. Yeah, just trade it with them. You no longer have your lucky seat. They have your lucky seat. All right. And you must trade. You must find somebody to trade. You'd like to trade? Oh, you have trade?
What trigger?
Okay. And you can't trade twice.
I can't trade with you.
I don't have one. Is there anybody who hasn't traded yet? No. Does anybody have a regular seat? Okay. Have all the regular seats already traded with the lucky seats?
You need to find a regular seat.
Tell you what, you can hold on to your lucky seat. You're the only person who has the lucky seat right from start to finish this way. So you are special. All right. So now that you've lost your regular seat or your lucky seat, I'd like you to put down your mood in moment 3. All right. And remember, scale of 1 to 5, not like -8 or +15. Okay. And if I see those numbers show up, I'll know you were listening. So, okay. So, moving on to memory. We are what we experience, but not. We are what we remember, but not what we experience. So, not all experiences are considered. This is kind of a summary of the ideas that Kahneman put forward. Duration of our experience is less important than the intensity. Recency, how recent an experience was, is important. And loss shapes our memory and our decisions significantly. So, let's see here. I meant to give you further instruction. Some of you, in looking at your kind of mood list here, there's a small instruction for you to read on the bottom of, if you had the papers that stand up, just have a look at the paper that stand up. You'll know because it has a fold in it. Just flip over and look at the bottom and read that and see if that affects your mood score.
I don't have it.
No, if you don't have it, that's no problem. It'll only be on the forms, I think, B and D. So, okay. And if it affects if it makes you feel any better, great. If it makes you feel any worse, great. If you don't have that, don't worry about it. So that was my first mistake in the experiment, just to note. So, be gentle at the end. Moving on to talk about memory then. Memory is actually, in my view. Oops, sorry. Let's go back here. Memory is one of the more fascinating aspects of what Kahneman did. People will choose to experience unpleasant sensations for a longer duration just because the ending of that period of time is more tolerable. There was an experiment in the book he talked about where people put their hand in cold water, not like ice water, but just cold. And they were willing to hold it in there longer, as long as at the end there was a 1 degree drop. And they'd hold it in there for an extra 30 seconds, even though there wasn't really a noticeable difference, but it was just enough. So this ignores the idea that it ignores the greater amount of suffering that an individual will experience overall as a result of taking that for longer. It isn't logical. People report less unpleasant memories of surgical procedures like colonoscopies when the average intensity of the procedure is less, or when the end of the procedure was less intrusive. So there was some discussion about these procedures where in the book he talked about cooling off period. It was less, I guess, less active, let's call it. I don't know what you call a colonoscopy at that point. And those people would generally report a better memory of the experience than people who at the very end, or for most of the procedure, ended up having not much going on, or a very short kind of procedure, but then something very intense happening at the end, very unpleasant. So those people generally reported a much higher level of negative feelings about colonoscopies. In both situations, people still have the full experience in all its unpleasantness. They just don't remember every moment equally. Mostly just the recent highlights. So people will subject their experiencing selves to greater suffering, knowing that they won't remember it all. So in a way, it's a battle with our own selves when we're setting up and having these experiences. We know that we won't remember all of those experiences. And because we won't remember them, we actually care less for the us who is going through them. So, great, right? How do you win that battle? Well, the remembering self is the one who's always going to win that battle, because the experiencing self has no say over it. So, however, loss is different. The feeling of losing something has a powerful effect on people. Just the possibility of losing and remembering past losses leads us to different choices when identical situations are framed as losses. You could have a completely identical set of situations, which when you frame it positively, somebody said, no, maybe I'm going to take that. Maybe I'll take that bet because it seems okay to me. But if you flip it around and it has a possibility of loss, even though the chance of winning something is the same, most people will say, hey, I'm not, at some point they're going to just say, no, not a chance. Kahneman pointed out that in simple cases, this could actually require 2 times potential gain to overcome that feeling of loss. In other situations like life and death, there might be absolutely no gain that would compel you to take a bad deal, for example. So the idea of loss and the idea of the impact of a loss and its permanence or its magnitude greatly affect our decisions about how to face the world. So that's important, and you'll see, because you might have lost a lucky seat or gained a lucky seat, as the case might be. So let's move on, because you can see that we have conflict between our experiencing self and our remembering self. Kahneman calls these the kind of the system 1 and system 2 ways of thinking. So you'll see that in the system conflict, we can think clearly for a short time, focus our attention, but only if we try hard. So, system 1 simplifies, but it does a bad job of it. A story, we always look for a story where there isn't one. We also know that system 2 is better, and it's more rational and logical, but it's limited. It runs out of gas pretty quickly. In terms of overcoming that, deep experience can overcome the effort of trying to find logical and informed examination of a complex situation. But deep experience is sometimes hard to come by, and it's hard to come by in all areas at once. So our first impressions generally feel reasonable, even if they're not. So this is your system 1 saying, okay, world, I gotcha, I understand you. We create stories to explain cause and effect, even when there is no link, as we saw with that example of the roses and the maple trees growing in the ocean. Generally speaking, this is good. Our days would be absolutely exhausting if we had to focus intensely on every task. Like if I was trying to think of the tea and the paper and the clicker and the TV and talking and not saying all at the same time, that would be exhausting. And to be blunt, this is not something I do every day, so actually it is fairly tiring. But if you were to add in everything, like standing or making sure that you're breathing okay, or that your head doesn't hurt, or that your knees don't give out, or things like that, it would be a very complex day for us and very complex set of moments. So let's check that out. Quickly as you can, hands up as soon as you can, calculate 3 times 5 and just throw your hand up. 3 times 5. Okay, seeing some hands go up. Some of you are struggling with that math. Okay, great. I mean, that's relatively quick. Okay. So let's take the same numbers. We actually have the capacity to focus intensively when needed, especially on unfamiliar or complex tasks. So let's take the same numbers, hands up as quickly as you can calculate 5 divided by 3. Okay. A little bit slower, right? 1.67. in case some of you went to multiple decimals. So it's the same set of numbers, a simple task, yet just slightly more complex. And so what Kahneman talks about in his book is that when we have even a series of slightly more complex moments, that can expend the energy in our system too, expend the energy of focus that we might otherwise have, and make our moments, or we've got a seat right here for you. It comes with this, and I hope you're good at math. Okay, good. Just those little tasks, those little complex moments, can make it much more difficult to overcome the impulses of our system one jumping to conclusions. So if you've done a bunch of like fairly, simple but yet complex tasks throughout the day, and then you're you're exhausted and you're faced with some other decisions along the way, your system one is going to be dominant. Like, it's going to be there trying to jump you to the story that makes sense, trying to jump you to the easy way through the rest of the day or through a situation. So how do we overcome that? Experts can overcome this because they treat a complex situation as relatively familiar. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in The Tipping Point, where, for example, 10,000 hours it's kind of the consensus point at which if you put 10,000 hours into something, whether it's hockey or finance or business development or something like that, dancing, you generally become good at it. You're an expert at it, and you don't have to focus on the basics anymore. You can recognize patterns, and that pattern recognition will be accurate. It won't just be jumping to conclusions. Chess grandmasters do the same thing when they see opening moves. They know the implications right away, and their instincts will be right. So our system two, which can overcome initial impulses and focus longer, it gets tired, like I said. We can't keep it on indefinitely, and that can lead us to some bad decisions. For those of us who don't have 10,000 hours to become an expert in everything, there's a little trick for us to help with this. So focus on something, and then have sweet. So like these. It sounds trite, but Kahneman did experiments on this. And they found that if you had a sweet or a piece of baking or something like that, after a period of concentration, even relatively intense concentration, that influx of energy would allow your system two to refocus again. So it's a very practical way to overcome a momentary depletion of your ability to focus. Stop, have a sweet coffee or something like that, and then go back to what you need to focus on. So this is great for, say, studying at school, or focusing on a complex task at work, or some deal that you're doing in your personal or private life. So that's a trick you can apply to dealing with that kind of system conflict and running out of gas. Okay, so let's move on to decision making. So after all of this, like, I don't know about you, but I feel that it's somewhat of a miracle that we get anything right. In reality, getting everything perfect doesn't matter. Like, we just have to be right enough that we continue to survive, can find food, can find shelter, can continue on with the survival of the human race. And the rest is just icing on the cake. So, but in trying to make those decisions that get us there, there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way. So let's have a look at it. I've listed here only a few of the things that we struggle with when we're trying to make decisions. So I've mentioned framing before. There's also availability and WYSIATI, which is an acronym for what you see is all there is. So your ability to focus on information that's right in front of you and pretend that there's nothing else out there. There's anchoring. There's reversals, so changing decisions, so you're no longer consistent with a position you might have taken before. Loss aversion, we talked about losses earlier. And of course, a bias towards taking action. Sometimes the best medicine is to just sit on your hands and let the world continue on as it is. So, decision making combines these cognitive biases in a way that deeply shapes our thinking. Framing, as we talked about before, how a decision is presented to us shapes how we approach it from an emotional and evidence perspective. Has the problem, though, been set up to nudge us towards a certain decision? So if you are thinking about certain transactions in your life, whether it's a car or house or taking a certain kind of job or following a certain kind of career path, has that decision been framed for you by others? Whether it's advertising or parents saying, hey, that's the best career path. You need to be an engineer or a doctor when you want to be an artist or something like that. So being aware of the framing influences that are at play while you're trying to take a decision is extremely important, because then you can actually stop, have a sleep, and think about what other evidence or what other sources of information might be out there to help you take a decision about that. And that's very important in areas such as finance, for example, where there's a lot of complex and, let's say, potentially biased or unsuitable advice that might be trying to guide you in certain fields. So, availability of information. We talked about not taking a moment to do a Google search earlier on today. Be aware of that, and to be aware that others are subject to that too. So your bosses or your kind of colleagues at work, you want to be able to understand that you might need to go beyond what they're saying to you, or ask questions about where their information has come from, so you can understand if it's comprehensive or has a reasonable basis, or if it's something they picked up from YouTube Shorts in the morning or something like that. Anchoring is another important one. You'll have seen that in the book. The idea of anchoring was also really important in things like negotiations, or not understanding, but affecting where you're starting from in looking at and analyzing a situation. So in a negotiation, like we'll have all heard about a situation where nobody wants to be the first person to go, because as soon as a number is out there, that number is what everyone talks about or talks around. So what's happening in a negotiation situation like that is that first number, no matter how ridiculous it is, actually becomes an anchor, that then reactions to that number start to dictate the reactions that the parties have between themselves. I'm not a negotiation expert, so if I'm butchering this and you guys have negotiation experience, then please forgive me, but that's the idea of the power of anchoring, at least in that field. And it also has an important effect in how we consider the value and enjoyment we're getting out of our day-to-day lives. So there's an idea called hedonism, where as you collect more and more in your life, nicer cars, nicer house, ability to travel to fancier locations in better airplane classes, you actually enjoy it less and less. Like you may experience it better, but you don't get the same gain of enjoyment from the additional step up in luxury. So that's because you've been anchored. You're actually not comparing to your starting point, which was probably poor student eating noodles at some point just before before classes in university. You're comparing to the yesterday you who already has all this wealth or the you who last took a trip a month ago and is quite used to taking trips. So anchoring actually plays a very important unconscious role in how we experience the world. And then we make our decisions using that as one of the principles without even realizing it. Reversal. Reversal is interesting. Last year, we were talking about Charlie Munger's almanac. And Charlie Munger had this saying. He always said, invert, always invert. And that, to him, meant look at a problem from the opposite direction. If you aren't sure whether a deal was a good deal, flip it around and try to take the other party's perspective. By doing that, he was actually talking about the idea that if you take a situation in your life that you're not sure about and you need to make a decision about it, it could be, do I bet on something where there's a risk of loss, but I could get a whole fantastic gain? If you're not sure whether that's going to be good for you or whether you want to accept it, flip it around the other way and see whether you would accept it from the reversed position, because your emotions will tell you a lot about that too. In Kahneman's book here, Thinking Fast and Slow, he and his research partners conducted a number of experiments where they showed that people are actually quite inconsistent in how they approach these situations. When you flip around a situation that might actually be identical to what it was before you flipped it, people might actually make a completely different decision, especially if loss is involved or if hard calculations are involved and they just can't engage system 2 adequately to analyze it. They may make poor decisions around that, and that's something that's good to be aware of, because in a world where we're making some of our biggest decisions around things that we're the least familiar with, big transactions like cars, houses, finance, career changes, things like that, or medical decisions, for example, it's important to know that that's a tool. It's to ask, okay, what would you do in the opposite situation, doctor? Or how would you, financial advisor, approach this in a way that would help your family and maybe not mine? Like, what is it that would be the best here? So reversal is an important tool here. Loss inversion, as I've mentioned several times, it's really important because the potential loss from a decision could actually cloud your ability to take risk that would be broadly and globally beneficial to you, or beneficial to your organization, or something of that nature. If you're always kind of locked up by the possibility of loss, you might not be able to see the broader potential for taking a decision and having those gains accrue more broadly. Insurance is a great example of this. So in one of my previous roles, I was the Director General responsible for costing a whole bunch of different projects at National Defense. And one of the things that projects do is they set aside a contingency amount in case stuff goes bad. Well, that's driven by the idea also of stuff could go bad. If there's an implied loss in that. But when you stand back and look at it logically, what's the chance that 100% of your projects are going to go bad all at once? It's pretty low, statistically speaking. And so the idea is that you could probably set aside, instead of setting aside a contingency amount for every single project, you could probably set aside the same contingency amount, but for only 1 in 5 projects. Assuming you'd basically be assuming that 1 in 5 would go bad. And by setting aside a smaller amount of contingency in this insurance example, or in this portfolio example, you've got the rest of the money that you would set aside to do something with. And so, for example, you can be afraid of loss, but still be able to take better decisions without. Anyway, I don't know how to finish that sentence. So, right, okay. The last one I have here. I'll just check the time, is a bias for action. How many of you have been watching the political ads recently? Like, we're gonna do stuff. We're gonna do stuff for Canadians. We're gonna do stuff for Trump. We're gonna do stuff for the auto sector. We're gonna do stuff. Anyway, it's all about action. Right? Nobody talks about, well, we're just gonna hold on here and like we're just gonna move the puck around in the corner here and do nothing exciting with it. No, like nobody wants to hear that, right? This is a really important bias in decision making. People are afraid to just sit tight because there's something implied in taking a decision, in positively moving forward. Well, it might be positive, it might not be, you don't know. Taking the decision is a sign and a signal of confidence, even if that confidence is based on your system one that has been jumping to conclusions and might not actually be engaging the right information or evidence to make that decision. Bias for action is really important. So we make a lot of changes when something goes wrong, but have we considered whether that's necessary? Is it possible that whatever happened was actually out of our control, just like it was due to the randomness of life? Nobody wants to accept randomness of life as an answer for why something happened. They want to see it prevented from happening in the future, especially if it was negative. So the bias for action is important to be aware of, even though, or because taking an action might not actually be your optimal way to approach situations in life. So you need to weigh whether the status quo has what you need and what taking an action would actually lead you towards. So that's I'd say the meatiest part of what we're doing today here in terms of the discussion. So I've had a few reflections and I'm just trying to see where I'm going to ask you to do the last number, but okay. I'm going to move on to our reflections here. What does this all mean? What does it mean when we're choosing what to do? What does it mean when reflecting on our experience or when making decisions? I think that we can actually enjoy life more if we structure it for happier memories. So this is knowing that our experiencing self is only going to be aware of certain things, but it's not going to remember them. So have hard workouts. Like if you go to the gym or if you go hiking or walking or whatever, do it intensely. Get the health benefits from that. Have a long cool down period. Make it less intense at the end. Make it more pleasurable at the end, because that's what you're going to remember. But you'll still get the benefits of that hard workout. Even though you might feel like you're suffering while you're doing it, you won't remember that part as much. Be intentional in how you consume information. So read a program of related books, for example. If you like reading, which I assume you do, you're here at a book club, read a set of books that's actually related to each other. Read it, so that you have ideas that are going to create or books that are going to have ideas that are interlinked. So as you go through the experience of reading those books, the linkages between those ideas actually start to reward you for having read those previous books. The earlier reading enriches your later reading. In the book, Kahneman talks about this in terms of earlier practice of piano or an instrument, for example, or listening to music actually rewards your enjoyment of playing music or listening to music later, because you have developed some depth around it. You've developed some anticipation. It's become part of that growing expertise that you are developing in those fields. So we're also not a slave to our memories. We can choose what to keep. I say that as if it's easy. Keep your good memories. wherever possible, create new memories to replace and overcome your bad memories. Now, great, I've said that. How the heck do you do it, right? Call a dear friend or family member that you might have fallen out of touch with, or you've got somebody got mad at somebody because they didn't go to mom's house at a certain time, whatever the reason is. Just call them. In the end, if you have a regret of something that you haven't done, that you should have done, or you feel like you should have done, do it if you have the opportunity to, or something close to it. That's what you'll remember. The past, or what's kind of gone before, it tends to be wiped out by these newer memories. So try that. And don't blame me if it doesn't work. It's hard. I'm sure it's harder said than done. And remember, big decisions are tough. Nobody has time to be an expert in everything. So find yourself an expert that you trust, or a couple of experts, and take their advice. So chances are that you won't be able to do better, or collect better evidence, or avoid common mistakes. So get an expert. And I'm going to close here with a quote by Daniel Kahneman, which kind of sums up a lot of what we saw today. So we think, each of us, that we're much more rational than we are. And we think that we make our decisions because we have good reasons to make them. That sounds reasonable. Even when it's the other way around. So we believe in the reasons largely because we've already made the decisions. So I think that's a great quote from Kahneman. And I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to present some of my ideas and to revisit this book. So that's the overview for today. And thank you for your attention. But that's not the end of today, because, as always, we haven't finished the data stuff yet. So I'm going to ask you in that moment 4 box to write down how you're feeling right now. Right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to little groups. You can pick a group, clusters of, I guess, 4 or 5 people, and pick one of the discussion questions that you'd like to talk about. And then we'll come back in about 20 minutes, half an hour, give or take, however long it takes me to input the data and make a fancy graph.
How about the 4 groups? Okay, so basically around the table, 1, 2, 3. How about 3 group? Okay, work.
Sure, I've got 3 questions, so maybe each group can.
Okay, 3 group around the table. Okay, so it's easier. So more people. I will move to the first one.
And
if you're wondering what the questions are too, I put them up on the screen, so feel free to come and have a look if you need. It's what was this book's most surprising finding for you? What strategy would help you benefit the most from the lessons in this book, and why? And where are these psychological findings most used to influence or manipulate us in our day-to-day lives? So, all right. And I'm going to come around and collect your papers. So I had the chance to sit in on some of the discussions, and you all have a different perspective on the different questions, which has been great. So we talked about AI and algorithms and how to kind of strategies for how to do things better. It was anyway. I think there are ways that we can apply some of the lessons from this book that are going to be useful in our life. But it's hard to figure out how to put those into practice. So I don't have any closing words of wisdom. So what I'll do is I'll dazzle you with some small sample data instead. So you all of you except for one filled out their data sheets. Somebody else put in check marks, but okay, we'll forgive you. That's a form of data. But I ran a little experiment here. So I was actually looking at a few different things. You see fancy bars up behind me, but what I was actually looking for was in group A, you recall there were 4 groups, so 4 letters if you had your papers. There was groups A, B, C, and D. And I expected to have a more even split amongst the groups, but I had more in A and less in C. So take this with a grain of salt. But I applied a few different things, and you'll figure this out as we went through, but some of you started off with something more than others did. You got a lucky seat, and other people got a regular seat. Well, all you really got was a piece of paper. So it shouldn't have had any real effect on your life, but it did.
Mislead by you.
Yeah, I trust you all misled yourselves very well. So then you had a little bit of time to let the joy of your lucky seat wear off, or Then I took away that something, which should have been meaningless, but I took it away and I gave it to somebody else who was sitting next to you. And the only thing I didn't say was look at them in the eye and see how happy they were to get this piece of paper. But your responses did that for me. So, and then I had a little bit more time to let all that wear off. You'll also notice that a few of you had pieces of paper that folded, right? And there was, not this one. Okay. On the bottom of them was actually a framing question. If you were in group B, you were getting positive framing. I was telling you that losing your lucky seat, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Somebody else was going to be happy. But if you were in group D, I was like, somebody took your framing or your lucky seat. How fair is that? So let's see how the results turned out here, because having some data to look at stuff is really important. So it's probably a little small for you at the back. You're welcome to come up here and really scrutinize. But essentially what we saw is that in group A, who were the people sitting with lucky seats, essentially you started off a little bit happier. Actually, group A and B started off with lucky seats. They were a little bit happier at the beginning, and that anchored part of your responses for the rest of the moments too. So you'll see that group A and B started off at an average of around 4. C and D were 4 minus, let's call it. So you're pretty happy overall. There were some 3s in there, some 5s. Everyone's got a different day. Probably the snow. I'm going to say it's not me. But then we moved on to our moment 2, which was just letting time pass. In some cases, people got really happy. Group B, I'm not sure. The really lucky seat. But then what we saw is that Group B was less happy because I took away the lucky seat. But Group C and Group D, Group C was I don't know what's happening here. Let's say, Group C, they ended up feeling happier for some reason there. They should have felt unhappy. Oh no, Group C got the lucky seat. They got the lucky seat. And Group D, they should have got the lucky. No, they got something else. Yeah, they got ripped off.
Yeah,
to use Trump's term. So anyway, you'll just see that these small things, the small exchange of a piece of paper that was meaningless to you, or should have been meaningless to you, actually affected averages. Maybe it's just a matter of the small samples here, but that level of variation probably shouldn't have happened if we all just sat here in a room. You would have just been 4s or 3s or 3.5s across the board. But it generated something. And maybe that was, a bias towards action. Okay, Derek said, this is moment 3, it's a big moment, we have to do something. Should we do the same thing? No, I'm gonna mark it down slightly different, right? But what you can see from this small sample of around 20 people is that there was some variation. And now it's up to you to decide whether or not that variation had any meaning to it. And whether that was your own kind of biases, such as we saw in thinking fast and slow, at play. Because if something so simple as a little teeny piece of paper can change your mind in an instant, how does, a constant flow of negative news media or big life events or other things like that affect you at any point in time? So go forth into the world, be happy, make new memories about being happy, forget about any negative memories here, write reviews, Armstrong is great. And that's all anybody will remember. So what I'd love to do now, though, is give an opportunity for questions and answers. I'd be happy to kind of dwell into any further subjects that might be on your mind that we haven't talked about. And then we can wrap it up. I won't kind of stretch this out or anything like that. So, yeah, thanks a lot for your time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Derek. And this is a really hard book, but it's very, very helpful. I think I can see from our discussion, and it's enlightening our in future life to live a much better life. I think that's the purpose of our club. And thank you again, Derek. And there's a gift for our guest. Thank you.
Thank you.